Okay, everyone. Hey, here's the update. It is the Magic the Gathering unofficial audiobooks podcast. I am Phil. Just want to take this moment to say thank you again, seriously, from the bottom of my heart. Your support meaning so much to me. It's because of you that I do get to keep doing this. Whether you've been here from the start or just joined, I appreciate every single one of you. And again, the updates have been few and far between, but we're trying to keep the chapters rolling. Life has been a whirlwind for me between the brewing, family, keeping up with everything else. It's been busy, but the best possible way. Big thing I'm excited about. My mother is coming to visit Japan. She's going to arrive tomorrow. It's been a long time since we've seen each other, so I'm looking forward to showing her around, introducing her to the chaos of my daily life, and just getting some time together with her grandkids. She'll be meeting my son for the first time. And, on the creative side of this, we're trying to continue to work through this book, Prophecy, which I've come I'm enjoying it more than I thought I would. I heard a lot of bad, not bad, but like that it's not very engaging. But I've found myself more and more engaged as the game as the book goes on. But so we're gonna keep it rolling, and so I'm excited about this. And as most of you know, our next book we're gonna jump back in time in with the Thran. That's gonna be our next book, and then we will hit the invasion cycle. So we're gonna jump back and learn more about Yawgmoth and the whole reason he's putting this whole thing together. I suppose that's what I think the book is about, anyway. Again, I've gotten a bunch of comments recently too from YouTube viewers. We're now on YouTube. It just pulling the podcast from Spotify or whatever to over to YouTube as well. If you haven't, I could use the subscription there. Just go like it, whatever, like the vids and all that. Make some comments, whatever. And I got a couple of nice um, mails or direct messages from people on Instagram that made my day when I see them, and I'm really excited that people are continually to find this and continuing to enjoy this. So that makes it very worthwhile to me, and I hope you are continuing to enjoy it as well. For those of you who have been here, so thank you for being here. Your support, not just about numbers and how many we get, it's this passion and shared love for these great stories and the motivation you give me to keep it happening. You make it possible. I don't take it lightly. Very happy that you're here. Try to continue to update you. If you haven't joined the Patreon yet, that helps support this financially, and that's a big help for me as well. So just trying to keep her rolling, all right? We'll check in with you guys soon, okay? Thanks for listening. This is a little bit of a shorter chapter, so trying to give you a little update as well, huh? All right, there you go. Let's get it going. Chapter 13. Haddad's work on the steel ant continued. Each day found him carefully repairing parts, recreating linkages, and reconnecting cables, but he no longer imagined that he would miraculously escape once he completed it. A single ant wouldn't carry him from Keld, and couldn't have it following him around like a pet. He found it harder to concentrate. The murder committed in the shop below him preyed on his mind. He saw Arissa and her entourage several times through the window as they went back and forth from the Cradle House to visit Latula's house. The Cradle Mistress was accompanied by a number of young boys, each bigger than the last. Greel was growing fast. Haddad also watched several funeral processions slowly wind from the gates of the Cradle House toward the mountains. Haddad knew that the small shrouded forms were the result of the monster's appetite. How could Arissa and her creature kill within the compound and not be discovered? In any league town, one often saw children's funerals, but to have so many in just a few days. Dad also remembered the cold comments of the cradle woman. The death of children was common in the cradle house, but had increased as of late. So what dark sorcery did Orissa practice? Haddad resolved to learn more. He requisitioned some pure alcohol to clean parts of the ant's mechanism and ordered several times what he needed, using the extra to spike a sack of wine. Come join me, Haddad called to his stockman the next day. The league technician sat inside a stable with 2 cups and his wine. Latula had several separate enclosures for beasts, and one was nearly abandoned as many of the mounts were with Latula's party. A lone servant was cleaning and repairing tack for the missing animals. The slave was returning from the main house with a chunk of bread from the kitchen. Haddad knew the man often ate separate from the other servants. Some wine will wash down your meal better than water from the trough, Haddad offered as he filled a cup. The liquor was far stronger with the addition of the cleaning alcohol, but the slave gulped it down without a word of appreciation. The stockman only held out his empty cup for more. I am Haddad from the southern continent. I know very little about the other servants or about Keld, Haddad explained as he filled the man's cup once again. Perhaps you might instruct me? The stableman's response was to drain his cup again, this time in slow swallows. The man was big, but smaller than the Keldon warriors. His clothes stank of dung and sweat. His brown hair was long and greasy. His face was nearly hidden by a snarled beard. A series of tattoos swirled around his eyes, and a broad expanse of scalp hinted at his previous hairline. I don't like to gossip like an old woman. Talk to others if you'd know more. The stableman threw the dregs of his cup against the wall, leaving a stain. Haddad spoke quickly before the slave could leave. I would speak to the old woman, but there are none to be found. I know women have been stolen from my own country, but I haven't seen any female slaves except from the cradle house. Where do they all go? Haddad asked hurriedly. The stableman paused. As you said, all women go into the cradle house. They bear Keldon children or help care for them. Perhaps other places in Keld allow human females to be outside the cradle house walls, but not here, he said slowly. But if only slaves bear Keldon children, where do the Keldon women give birth? Haddad was trying to get a firm grip on the facts. They don't, was the reply. Here all warriors spring from slave mothers, the slave continued. The Keldon females can bear children, but almost all choose not to. Why? Haddad asked. A race that replenished itself by stealing women to bear its warriors? A race with little nor pregnancy by accident? The Keldons seemed beyond understanding. Males and females do not have sex, except to bear children. The mother would bear most of the burden alone after the male left. It's much easier to have slaves do the hard work of bearing children, while the Keldon women concentrate on other things, he finished. Now, I must work. He staggered as he got up, but set a course for the tack room and walked fairly straight. Haddad looked at the deflated sack of wine and considered the information he had just received. The Keldons raided for tufa, but a race that depended on slaves to replenish itself had an endless appetite for subject people. Haddad wondered if the League could beat off an invasion by such a race. The following morning, Iola called upon him in the workshop. I'm checking to see what progress you have made in completing the ant, she said as she swept through the door. Haddad had continued working, but the machine was still primarily parts scattered over the table. Iola turned to him with a severe expression. Attila will be arriving in several days for the Festival of Passage. I suggest you have the device completed by then, or your screams will sound throughout the night when the mistress arrives, she warned. Haddad knew that no excuses would be acceptable, and Iola left before he could get a more precise timetable. The next days were spent entirely in the workshop. Haddad soon realized that testing would consume more of his time than he had planned. Without a power stone to show if the parts were working, Haddad had to go through laborious exercises and makeshifts to see. Finally, he realized that until he had a power stone, he'd never know if his repairs worked. He locked the workshop a final time and went for his room. The sheaf of notes he had written on his experience in Keld he left in the rafters of the first floor, but he took with him a wire garrote sewn into his clothing and a small knife hidden in his wallet. They were small prizes compared to the wealth of tools he left behind, but perhaps it was better to travel light when one has a long way to go. The Festival of Passage commenced, and a bizarre sense of gaiety could be felt throughout the household. The Keldons observed a holiday to commemorate the beginning of a change for the approaching year. The festival celebrated the completion of the flight from their enemy in ancient times. Even the slaves were happy, for by custom, punishments for everything except serious crimes were waived or delayed. Not that the slaves ran wild with freedom, for the Keldons had a long memory and were always ready to punish when the festival was over, but for a few days the slaves were free of the heavy hands of their masters. Warriors competed in fights with blunted and padded weapons, their aggression channeled against each other as it was inside the cradle house. Winners of the contest gained the attention of the commanders and perhaps a chance to advance on the next mission. Slaves aped their masters with feats of strength, and Hadad watched the stablemen win the wrestling matches. Other slaves gave the victor trinkets, but no overseer took any notice. Hadad could see the fights inside the cradle house enclosure grow more and more vicious as children sought dominance. More and more he saw single males mastering their fellows while the girls bonded together into separate groups. Everyone was locked in contests for position but Hadad. The struggles seemed irrelevant as he worked on the steel ant. Each day saw him closer to completing it, but his work furthered his enemy's plans. Each part fixed and oiled felt like a betrayal. Hadad tried to appear content under the eyes of Iola, but he could not. So far, his living conditions were comparatively pleasant when contrasted with his earlier captivity, but at least at the colony, the illusion of escape or the more improbable rescue by Kipama League forces kept his spirits up. Despite the run of the kitchen and the respect he received from the other servants as an armbanded slave, Hadad felt impotent. His mood didn't improve as a round of guests appeared from the cradle house. Arissa was accompanied by a new set of female followers. They were well groomed, and the male servants took advantage of an opportunity they hardly ever had, a chance to talk to a woman of their own race. The cradle women were soon surrounded by as many admirers as any socialite beauty at a league ball. Hadad had no desire to speak with them. Each one collaborated in the enslavement and controlled breeding of humanity. Whole nations might flow under the hands of the cradle mistress and midwife, but only Keldons marched away as their slave mothers bore more Keldon children. Arissa was talking quietly with Iola. Stooped and eating a small cake and tea, the cradle woman reminded him of an elderly maiden aunt. Then he saw the young warrior standing behind her. The youth was near his full growth and clad in fine clothes, a sword at his side. His stance and alertness unnerved the technical officer, but he had no idea why. Then the soldier turned, and he got a glimpse of the extra-wide mouth. It was Arissa's demonic servant grown large, either that or a close sibling. Hadad was unable to say which would be worse. He began moving as far away as possible, then an announcement rang through the hall.
All gather for Cirque, the storyteller.
All present flowed to the side of the room and stopped a respectful distance from an old warrior. The man was scarred and infirm, though not missing any limbs as many other older Keldons. His clothing and weapons were of fine quality, but jarring in the clash of color and styles. It wasn't until after Cirque walked to stand before the crowd and bumped into a table with a searching hand that Hadad realized the man was blind. More warriors and women poured in from parts of the house and the grounds. A large crowd began to push each other for better viewing positions. Hadad moved to the rear of the room and could catch only glimpses of the storyteller, but once the Keldon spoke, his voice filled the space.
Not all great tales are finished. Listen to the prophecies of the final days.
Cirque said, and he gestured grandly in a style of speaking that Hadad was unfamiliar with.
Keld was created from the blood of heroes, drifting from our ancient shores until we landed north. At first, these children were timid, holding only enough land to live and selfishly thinking of themselves before the people. In time, the blood ran thin, and the spirit of the people gasped for relief and for the taste of battle they had left behind. On that day, the first Keldon Witch King was born.
Cirque paused to wet his throat with wine.
He towered over the north, as giants loom over normal men. A great destiny awaits me, were his words when he soon out the womb. I shall bring forth a nation to cleanse the world from all darkness. The king lay down with the women of his enemies and brought forth sons and daughters to swell his army. At last he stood upon the mountain and called forth, I am ready for the darkness. Let my enemies stand forth, and the final battle begin. But the servants of evil were cowards, hid from the Witch King, plotting his death. Many times they tried to pull him down, but always failed. Still, they refused battle, denying the Witch King his rightful victory. At last, the king called to his people, I am growing old, and a new leader must follow and claim my victory. With that, the king passed the crown and went to the necropolis, falling into a sleeping death. Each king has followed him into his palace, as the millennia has passed. Each waits for the enemy to reveal himself, for the final days to begin the final battle. And on that day, all the Witch Kings interred in the palace will arise from their slumber. The great host shall march and crack the world.
Cirque finished his recitation with a flourish.
But the final days are upon us!
Rang out a warrior's voice. One of Latilla's guards climbed on a table and began speaking to the crowd.
Death is spreading throughout the land. Children die in the cradle house as the enemy seeks to choke our numbers. We must awaken the Witch Kings and take the battle to the enemy. And where shall we march?
Argued a gate guard.
The enemy hides as he always has hidden. Until he reveals himself, we cannot raise the kings. Blasphemy!
Cried yet another warrior.
The kings shall rise when they are ready, and you imperil the final victory by your talk of disturbing them.
A multitude of voices broke out as every Keldon forgot their usual deference to the superiors and tried to shout each other down. The respect and awe that all Keldons felt for those of greater strength fled as religious fever drove each to define what was right and true. Swords were drawn and cries of pain began to sound in the hall as steel punctuated arguments. Cradle women and the slaves were caught up as well, and Hadad wondered how many would die before the fight ended.
Enough!
The shout was punctuated by the chandeliers and candles throughout the room flaring and then exploding in blasts of boiling wax. Arguments were forgotten as all present squinted their eyes and desperately wiped off the fiery debris. Latilla had returned home. Iola ran through the crowd to explain to the artificer, but was waved silence before she could reach the mistress of the house.
Dogs baying in the night,
Latilla said intently.
Arguments that have been said 100 times and solved nothing. I came to celebrate passage, but it appears that you are stuck in my way.
She drew herself up and looked over the crowd.
The festival is over. A new passage has begun.
She pointed off to the side.
We travel for the necropolis tomorrow, and the Witch Kings will awaken, or we will drag them into the light of day.
Tulla stalked away, leaving a confused babble behind her.